a public comment over here.
Hi, my name is Lisa Morris and I'm at 7997 South Lakeshore Drive in Harbor Springs. And the agenda today is to review the setback requirements for 5 Beach Avenue. So what I'm speaking about now doesn't have to do with the setback requirements. It has to do with the disposition of the current buildings at that location if the setback requirements are approved today. We understand that the owner would like to tear down all 3 of the buildings. There is a large group of people that are interested in saving those buildings and having them moved. We totally understand that the owner does not want moving a building versus destroying or demolishing the building to impact his schedule. We totally get that. If I'm building onto my place right now, I want things to stay on schedule. Okay, but since we are currently under load restrictions for the highways, the demolition company would be under the same load restrictions that a house moving company would be. So neither one can happen until load restrictions are removed or they make the demolition load smaller, which is going to be more expensive for them because they have to truck stuff in small loads. Okay, so I personally feel that there is time to get things in place for those houses to be lifted and prepared for move. So the day that those load restrictions can be removed, that those houses can be moved because there are at least 2 people, if not 3, that are interested in moving those houses to their properties.
Okay, good. I'm happy that you've come here and talked with us. And I'm glad to know there are people out there who are interested in this kind of thing.
Yes.
I think from here, it's something that that you have to work out with the owner, but.
Correct, but I want it to be part
Yes.
of the public record that there are people that are interested in saving the history and the charm of Harbor Springs, because that's part of the city's, what do you call the city charter?
Master plan.
Master plan, there you go, thank you, I knew it started with it. Okay, so I just wanted to have that go on record, and then also if there is a representative from the family here today to have them hear the message as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We do have one person on Zoom. I don't know if they are interested in.
Any comments from our Zoom audience? And if so, you can use the little hand thingamajig to raise your hand, and if not, we'll get into it. All right. Let's see. Moving on.
So just go down to one of the pages here. And I'll provide a brief introduction and then hand it over to the applicant. I think this is the page that probably provides best oversight here. The red lines are the locations of the existing buildings that are on the property. And the applicant is proposing to remove those buildings and replace it with the gray shaded structure that's there, which is a new residence with an attached garage. One thing that I think is important that we clarify, they've drawn on 2 different lines for setbacks. The important lines here is the line that's noted as the 15-foot side yard setback on both sides here. That is the current setback under the 2005 zoning code. The other setback that's indicated, which is 8.35, that is the setback that could be implemented in or was in the ordinance 439 code and could potentially be in a future code, but it is not the code that's existing right now. So we need to make sure that when we are discussing this, we're discussing it with the idea that we're looking at the 15-foot side yard setback and whether or not that poses a practical difficulty with their property. So we can see that they're entering into the side yard setback on both sides of the property here. A little bit less than what the old buildings were, but it is still more than what was there before as far as some of these other areas, which requires them to come to the zoning board of appeals and ask for practical difficulty for variance.
Jeff, would you point out again where the setback would have been under the 439?
So on the west side of the property, under 439 is
Yes.
this dash line here.
Got it.
And the applicant is here, and I believe that it looks like the structure complies with that setback. It does not comply with the setbacks for ordinance or for the 2005 code.
Thanks.
And just for reference sake, this is setbacks on a property that's how wide?
The width of the property is on here. Might have to look at one of the other pages.
It's on there in the back. If I read this correctly, it's 70.17.
Thank you. Yeah, it is noted.
70 feet.
And I'll hand that over to you, if you'd like to introduce yourself and provide your thoughts.
Do I need to talk to a microphone or?
If you would like to, we can.
I don't need to, I can speak loudly, I just don't know how it was picked up with your online, so. My name is Nick Liebler, White Liebler Architects, owner of the business, and here representing the property owners at this point as applicant. As a former zoning board of appeals member for Emmett County, I know what it takes to be zoning board member, so thank you all for your time tonight, thank you for being here. Just one little correction, the lot width got cut off on the one that Jeff had, but if you go to the site plan with the yellow or the red lines on it, it's about 69 feet 7 inches when you actually come across on a perpendicular that 70.17 is a really slight angle. To kind of give you a little history on the property, our owners contacted our office as well as their legal counsel when the opportunity to purchase this lot came forward. At that time, the planning commission was in the process of redoing the ordinance. Not everything had been ironed out yet. We had multiple meetings with Jeff, both the legal counsel and myself, to try to take them through their due diligence process and understand, because we knew there was a new zoning code coming, what that meant and what the implications on the structure were going to be for those owners. They were comfortable with the direction that ordinance was headed, purchased the property with that understanding on board, made a very sizable investment in the community, and then turned us loose, and we got started on the design process in the full letter of the law at that point in time. Fast forward to November, and we all know what happened with the ordinance and kind of the removal of that process. Where that then left us is an inability, because of a moratorium on zoning permits, to go ahead and move forward. We were at the point where we were ready with documents. We have a builder who is in the room as well tonight. Construction was teed up and ready to go for a spring start as soon as Mother Nature lets us loose here. And now we're kind of caught up in this weird conundrum of we're under an old zoning code that didn't apply at the time of design. That zoning code may be coming back, from what I understand, in a matter of a couple months. We're kind of caught in the middle of what I would say, on a zoning standpoint, in the state of Michigan, is probably one of the most unique circumstances that you can have, of kind of a code changing and then changing back and not being allowed to actually pull a permit during the process to move forward. So what we did, we went back and we relooked at the project and said, you know, I think the 12% lot width rule that was in place at the time of the zoning ordinance is very reasonable. This is a legal non-conforming lot, so the lot actually predates zoning. It's, as you can tell, from 70 feet roughly, a lot width quite a bit narrower than the 100-foot lot width requirement that the city has in that district. It is an exceptionally deep lot, so we actually pick up quite a bit of square footage area on the property. But to try to impose 15-foot setbacks on both sides of an already unnecessarily narrow lot at that point in time, you can see I had in my letter that I wrote is roughly 43% of that lot width gets eaten up by setbacks at that point in time. So very different than many of the lot widths that are conforming and have that extra width, legal room to work with. Most of these lots, as you're familiar with Beach Drive, are large estate properties. They are large buildings. They do command up a lot of area and a lot of frontage, but those properties also, other than this lot, are much narrower lots to work with. So in kind of keeping with the intent of the district at that point in time, we feel that 12% is a very reasonable ask. So that's a little bit of a history of kind of how we got to where we are. if you look on the site plan that you have, Jeff pointed out, there are 3 buildings on the site today. They are all non-conforming structures, and that not a single one of them meets any of the setback requirements. So every one of those structures violates current zoning code as well as the zoning code that was coming ahead of it. The one structure is 3.5 feet, a little bit over that, off of the west property line. The building in the back is a secondary house, or living quarters at that point in time, that violates both side yard setbacks. It also has a garage that, because of the orientation of that garage, those cars back out on the Pennsylvania Avenue and create a pretty unnecessary safety concern for both bikers and walkers and cars that come through. So the goal was to try to create something that satisfies the just right of the owners at that point in time to occupy the property. We are improving all of those nonconformities, or at least we were under the current zoning code that was in place at the time. And really trying to do justice to the applicants. So you can build the type of house that is suitable for that piece of property and that piece of, you know, real estate within the neighborhood. And we did our best to try to comply with what this was. It has been addressed, and I appreciate Lisa's concern for the structures that are on the property. Those structures are going to be removed, as she said. What the owners tend to do with those properties and what arrangements they make with other people is kind of outside of zoning. I think we could all agree that those are different conversations at that point in time that I don't think the city wants to get into handcuffing properties and zoning ordinance with what happens on existing structures. But nonetheless, we are replacing 3 non-conforming structures that all violate side yard setbacks with another structure that, in all intents and purposes, probably a few months from now is going to be compliant with the code. So we were very diligent to make sure that our request doesn't exceed what that new zoning code is. So when that is coming into place, the structure is a conforming structure with the ordinance at that point in time, and meets all of the language within. On that setback, you'll see we have calculations for what all of our setbacks are, what our lot coverage is, what's allowable, what isn't allowable, and we do meet all of those requirements. The one thing I guess that I wanted to point out is, you know, this in its application, as your zoning ordinance goes, I know Jeff said we have to look at it the way the current law is today, but I think I would challenge the board to say by the time we actually get into construction and the summer moratorium takes place, we are likely going to be conforming with the code that's coming at that point in time. It doesn't really create a circumstance that this gets evaluated on other properties, because as you know, everything is unique. So there are very few properties that fall within Weehawken Landowners Association and the city of Harbor Springs. This is a very small overlay that unfortunately they don't get to govern themselves. And so it is a little bit of a unique circumstance in kind of its isolation from the rest of the city. Very unique, and I think any precedence doesn't exist in that case because there are no properties that are similarly matched. There are renderings that are in the packet for you as well, just so you can see kind of the character of the house. You know, this, as all houses that we've designed within Weehawken, we've done dozens of homes throughout the community, as well as Harbor Springs, Harbor Point. We're very interested in kind of keeping with the historical context of the city. We very much value the fabric that exists here in the history. We emulate that through a lot of our architectural details at that point in time, and we do really try to address the fact that we're being good stewards of this community. The rendering that Jeff has up on the screen right now is the lakeside elevation or beach drive elevation. This house is kind of unique in that it has 2 front yards. The green lines you can see would be what current setbacks look like under the ordinance that's in effect today. The red lines are what we would have, the green lines are what was in effect at the time of design. The red lines are what are in effect essentially as of today. So you kind of see the detrimental impact that has on the elevation of the house and the available width at that point in time. Unfortunately, waterfront homes in Harbor Springs are all about being on the water and having views of the lake. That's a very big part of kind of the value of the real estate, and something that's very much in keeping with the rest of the houses in the community. So those are the drawings that you had in your packet. I just wanted to highlight those for you. If there's any questions that the board has, I'm available to answer anything that may relate to those. But in summary, I think this is a very reasonable request given the very, very unique circumstances that we find ourselves in from a zoning code standpoint. And I think does, significant justice to our applicant as well as kind of other properties in the community. I'm available to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a question for Jeff. When I look at that, the view from the street, the picture you set up and where the green lines are and where the chimneys are, and look at it here on the, on this map, on this site plan, sorry, would this design have needed to come to you for approval because the chimneys stick out past the,
No, so there's language in the zoning code. We have a few things that are exempt from setbacks. Up to 2 feet of roof overhang, up to 2 to 3 feet of chimneys. And I think basement egress windows as required by the building department. There might be 1 or 2 other things I'm forgetting off the cuff, but no, the chimneys don't pose an issue for me that, if the green line was the setback line, this would comply with zoning code.
thank
The-
you.
The chimneys aren't an issue.
And my question is similar. I'm looking at the steps that are coming off the porch. That appears to extend out past the chimney. Is that still in the setback?
Or are the steps
On the
exempt?
side.
See on the right side there?
This right over here, I did have a conversation with him about that is something that we do need to address.
Okay,
There is not an exception. For that. It is part of their proposal though. So if you were to grant a variance for the building of this structure, it would be including that as it's drawn. Unless you feel that that needs to be amended.
Or with a condition that they be removed or be oriented.
yes.
Yeah, and we can
You've
take,
thought about
consider, we had a conversation with that, Jeff. So the current zoning code that was in place does not address that specifically. Code that's in place today.
Right, I understand.
Does not take into account steps. So yeah, we can address those stairs if that's something that board would want to consider as part of their action. Those I would say are much less impactful to the design and not really a good part of what we're doing.
I was hoping that was the case, yeah.
Are there other questions for our presenter?
I don't have any.
Okay, thank you.
Any comment?
Are you open for public comment yet?
Sure.
Okay, I'm Chip Everest. I live next door on the west side and my family owns the east side. And we support the projects. I even support the steps.
I was gonna ask about the steps.
Okay.
And,
Well,
one point of clarification though, is that I would not assume that the newest code is gonna be coming into effect. So I'm gonna use that, sorry.
we don't know what changes.
We don't know
will
what
be
to
made.
do. We have no idea.
It's an ongoing process, so you can't.
But we do support the project.
And I would just reiterate that we have to review this under the merits of the existing code.
Yes.
True, right.
I got a question. Is it true that we are going from 2 residences to 1 residence?
Correct.
Or from 3 residences to 1 residence?
There were sleeping quarters and everything you could constitute a full residence in that little guest house that's in the middle, whether that was known to code officials or not. It certainly was a habitable space at that point in time. So yeah, in that sense, yes, we're going from 3 dwelling units on a property, which is certainly not allowed by code, down to just 1 structure.
And the significant purchase of this property is based on the due diligence of understanding the zoning code that is going to be in effect for the consideration of the project. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, and a very sizable real estate transaction that took place because of that understanding.
Is there a difference between, you know, the difference between the two square footages of setbacks? The delta?
It's on our sheet.
I guess it's insignificant if we were considering only the one zoning ordinance.
I don't have a total for the 3 buildings combined, no, I'm sorry.
Or were you talking about the square footage of the difference between the setbacks under the current code versus under the repealed code?
Yes, we talked about it being 40% of the lot under the one code, and I was curious what the other percentage was. And it's less.
And from a lot coverage standpoint, I'm not sure the allowable lot coverage, if that's what we're getting to under the code as it exists today,
Yes.
is 9,000 square feet of lot coverage. We are at 65. I'm sorry, we are at 8,000 roughly of lot coverage.
So we're underneath that.
We are below the threshold of what's allowable from lot coverage standpoint by a significant amount still.
Thank you.
And that's because the lot extends across Beach Road?
It does extend across Beach Road. There's a big chunk of real estate that's on that side of the road as well, but it also extends all the way back to Pennsylvania. So these lots are very unique, kind of in their depth and their proportions.
I have a question, sort of clarification. You talked about these few lots in Weequatonson being part of the city, and as part of the city, they're kind of, they're part of the association and part of the city, so they live under 2 different regimes at once. And you know, part of what the zoning code wants to do ideally is make the community look like a community so that it doesn't, you don't get some odd duckling in the middle of the row of swans. And so I wonder with this one, you know, when you look at what's around it, were you looking at the vernacular that is pretty common in the rest of Weequatonson that's outside of the city?
So the architecture of this building throughout, you know, is, I say, consistent with Weequatonson. It's consistent with Main Street, Harbor Springs, with what exists out as you head towards the point. It's, you know, it's period style architecture. It's very traditional in its detailing. I would say kind of supports the vernacular of everything within the residential districts. Obviously, very a little bit different when you get up by the high school and the style of those homes, and just because of the age of those structures. But very kind of consistent with what happened in, I would say, the older part of Harbor Springs.
And similar in size and scope to some of the newer houses in newer rebuilds in Weequaton.
Certainly, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, things are just getting larger because of lifestyle, what people are trying to do today.
Well, and because we don't make part of the family live in a separate, you know,
Yes,
we don't separate resident. There were good reasons to separate things into 3 buildings, and those reasons don't exist anymore. Sorry,
No, that's fine.
It probably is worth noting out too, because of current building codes and energy codes, this kind of gets into the existing structures that are there. It is very difficult to rehab structures of that age. Those buildings that are there, I can tell you, meet absolutely none of our building or energy code requirements right now, and could not exist as they are today. So any work on those structures would involve almost taking them down to the point where there are new structures. So, and I know Jeff said there's some considerations in the code of kind of how far do you consider a remodel, and then what does that level of kind of rework look like? Just about anything from that era sort of crosses over that line, our experience.
Are the existing buildings 1 story or 2?
The Pennsylvania building is a single story structure. The one in the middle is single story. The one on Beach Drive looks like it's 2, but there's actually, those rooms aren't what you would consider the habitable space upstairs. You go through some kind of strange attic access points to get to those windows that are on the lakeside.
I have a question. Does the landowners association have any zoning codes or? And
So they have their own architectural requirements. Our thought process was we wanted to come to you to understand jurisdictional requirements before we have them go through their review process. We've done dozens of projects throughout Weequatonson, and the landowners association is usually most concerned with what the neighbors on each side think. Their biggest concern is not so much side yard setbacks, because everything in Weequaton is really tight to the side yards, especially once all those properties were remapped with houses that are over property lines. Their bigger concern is kind of where do you lie relative to water? Are you not protruding out or back from where your neighbors are? So trying to keep that line consistent, which we've done with this project.
Did I just hear that after this consideration, Weekly-Wisconsin Board then gets to review it?
It will go to Wisconsin Landowners Association for their approval.
So does that imply then there's an opportunity for changes that need to be made?
We would not be looking at dimensional changes that affect the side yards at that point. Really, their biggest concerns, what they get into are, like I said, that encroachment towards the water, which we're not asking for any type of variance there. So if anything, if the house moved, it would just be moving forward or backwards from the lake. And then architectural considerations.
So Jeff, a question for you, if the decision is made to approve this and changes have been made, then where does this stand?
We have a
We're
section.
approving this, we're approving a certain design application.
We have some language in the code to address that, if the changes are minor enough in detail, we can continue to move forward. We have a group of people that if they would review it, they could say these are changes that are significant enough that they might have to come back here for review. And that would just depend on what types of changes, if any, are proposed.
But it would be reviewed again.
Absolutely. So if they are to receive variance approval tonight, their next step with the city would be to submit a zoning application that we would give them, if approved, permission to go to the building department for permits. And at that zoning application review, I would compare it to this plan to see what the differences are, if any, before approval.
And then a decision whether it's major or minor, that's an administrative.
Yeah, we have a panel of people, typically when we're reviewing that, I think it's mainly intended for site plan reviews that may be done at the planning commission. So the chair of the planning commission, the city attorney,
Okay,
the
that's
city manager and myself are on that board that we would review the two and determine whether it needs to come back.
okay.
And I can speak from the history of projects that we have worked with through more on the township level of things. Projects that have gone through have really never resulted in changes on the outside. It's very
Gone
much
through the
aware
weekly association.
through landowners associations.
But just so that we all understand the process and if there's a significant change, what the process would be. Thank you.
We do have a person in the back.
Yes,
Aaron Goppigan, West Traverse Township. Just a question for Mr. Liebler, cool design, by the way. Is that a functioning widowed walk and cupola, or is it just cosmetic?
It is just cosmetic. That's just a spire shaped roof on the top.
And that railing, there's no real.
There's no
walking
ability
space.
to get out.
Okay.
We do have a participant online and they did put up a comment that they tried to raise their hand and didn't see the button. So I'm gonna ask them to unmute now.
sure, yep.
So Thatcher Waller, if you'd like to chime in with thoughts. I'm sorry, I think I accidentally muted you there. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I just wanted to reiterate really what Lisa Morris was talking about regarding trying to save some of these gems that are going into landfill. But I don't really have any problem with the building that's going to replace them. So that's all I wanted to say at the early part. And for some reason, there isn't a little hand to raise, at least on my system. So that's all I had to say.
Thank you for your patience.
I'm finished.
At this point, are we ready to discuss? Or do we have
Yeah,
more?
I do. I can ask at any time. Is the driveway, is that any kind of an exception to the setbacks? Explain that, would you?
Any-
Light on that if that's helpful.
So anything that's at grade level or below, like just bricks on sand, pavers, asphalt, things like that, they're not subject to our setbacks. The only concern would be if it's really close to a property line, I may ask for drainage information to make sure it's not creating water runoff onto a neighboring property, and we would review that at the zoning approval process. So there's no concern with that being outside of the structure setbacks.
Got it. So that would be something you would review then in the zoning application, because it does appear that this is right on the.
There's an easement.
Yeah, it actually crosses over the property line that.
It does, and
kind of
that's what
triangle
that
hash
easement
area.
is? Okay,
And that driveway exists.
okay.
It's a reciprocal easement that they showed.
I went over to look at it when there was lots of snow on the ground and I didn't get real close, so thanks.
Any other information that we need from the resource people we have here?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Is there any other information we need from the folks here? Just ready to discuss. What are people's, I have my opinion about this, but I'm interested in hearing what you all think.
Oh, I'm sorry, I do have a question.
Yeah.
Which are just the neighbors on either side, maybe Mr. Evers, the only ones that were contacted, or are there other neighbors farther around? What, that's a 300-foot or something?
Yes, we sent notice to property owners within 300 feet. So it was a small list, I think because of the size of the properties in that area.
Okay.
I think the list was only 8 or 10,
Mhm.
especially to the north, because you cross the street and it's the city of Harbor Springs, this piece here that we're at. But yeah, there were about 8 or 10 properties that were included in that list,
Okay,
along with a notice in the paper that may have had a date that was redone a couple of times to make sure that.
Right. So the only letters that we got were the ones from Mr. Evers to his family and this
Yes.
other gentleman that's not in the area. Okay,
Correct.
thanks.
Yeah, I guess I have one more question then. Because we're looking at the unique characteristics. I'm assuming that most of these other properties close by are as set back already as well. They're all close to the lot lines, or is that not true?
Without really looking at site plans and really verifying, I can't really say with any certainty one way or the other. I do know that we've got 1, 2, and 3 beach, which are recently developed. They do not have any setback issues, I believe. We did see one that had a variance request for the boardwalk going to the water over the low wet area. But also those properties are 100 feet wide. So they don't necessarily suffer from the same narrowness as this property. As we continue to go east and we get into some higher numbers, I think we have granted some variances for side yard setbacks in some situations. Without really looking at the record, I don't want to say for certain.
There are many historic homes that they can't say that do not meet the current zoning.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I spent a lot of time around Weequahic as a little kid because my grandmother worked. And those homes that sit sideways to the water are, I think they could, play soup can telephone between the windows of those buildings. And that to me is essential Weequahic character, that it's built tight like that in part for social reasons.
In city limits or outside?
They're outside.
Yeah.
So it really becomes, that issue to me, it's both about what the city does, but also about how this fits its surroundings.
And I don't think there are that many new homes east of that. I mean, there's in the city limits, there's probably, I don't know, 3 maybe.
Can you use the microphone?
Yeah.
Sorry.
As far as new construction, where you would have, where they would have been worried about the setbacks, I don't think there's maybe 3 new homes, from there to the Colonial or whatever. I think maybe less.
Oh, okay, I see.
I do have a question. I should know this, but What is directly north from this property and this property's driveway?
It's the city of Harbor Springs property, or this kind of area behind the parking lot.
Okay. I was gonna guess it was either that or the preserve that's back there.
I'm not sure exactly where that line is.
I think it's more the preserve.
It's more what?
Preserve.
The preserve? Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, so my comments, what I'm feeling and seeing from this findings of fact,
Mhm.
because some of the newer ones and some of these properties are wider, I think that it is a unique situation. And I think that, compared to what the neighbors are building, it would be unfair to expect them to not be able to build something similar. So that's my feeling looking at the finding.
Thank you.
I agree, it's a unique, very unique property and both neighbors are in favor of this. And it's actually going to move the house away from, I think, your house, Chip. So I think that is a positive for them and, I agree.
I mean, we've seen many cases where the existing property, the existing structures are not conforming, which is not surprising. That happens throughout the city.
Yeah.
And it is a very narrow lot. So just on the reasonability of wanting to have the same enjoyment of their property as their neighbors, I think to me, it's clear that it's not a self-created difficulty and that it's a reasonable request.
Kathy?
I guess my only, maybe I'm being the maybe I'm being the devil's advocate, but, when they bought the property, they were relying on the 439 zoning. So that was what, because I understand they spent a lot of money and went to it, but frankly, you know, they bought it knowing what was there already. And I'm just questioning, just because we get this a lot. Well, we bought the lot and then we found out that XYZ, and it's like, well, you know, you have a certain amount of due diligence, but you're indicating that they checked all of that out and they were familiar from the beginning that they were gonna take the property, take out the old house and put in something new.
Yeah, and a little bit, if I can address that. Contrary to what you get a lot of times where we bought it and we just didn't find out is they did very much go through that process, and at the time, that zoning ordinance that was being implemented, they were comfortable with what those side yards had. That was a big part of our due diligence, not understanding and knowing what that architectural footprint looked like. So they marched forward, but you know, an understanding they had essentially 15 feet more of lot width to build on than what they have.
Okay.
How long was 439 enforced before it was voted out?
I believe that ordinance 439 was recommended to city council in March and adopted in early April.
No, it was adopted May, late June, or late May, early June.
And then it was voted out in November, so 5 to 6 months it was in place.
When was the property purchased?
Oh, I don't recall that off.
And we don't actually need to go down that road. Cases like this come before the ZBA, even when we're not monkeying around with our zoning code. And it's the same set of issues regardless. It's, you know, my opinion on it, if there was a neighbor to the north of them trying to look through that lot and their view was being changed, which it would be by the way this house is sited compared to the other one, that would be a consideration, but there's not. And the fact that there are 3 non-conforming buildings, very non-conforming, knowing we you know, having this replaced with a building that's up to all the different codes, you know, is a benefit in the long run. I am sympathetic with what George Pete brings to us, but I think there's a fair amount of subjectivity in whether whether something fits the character, has the same charm. I mean, that, you can go on for days about it does fit, it doesn't fit, and that's why I've been trying to poke at these little issues about the neighborhood right around it, the neighbors right around it. And I think, you know, it's a pretty straightforward case of having an unusual lot and needing a variance in order to build. Now, what do we do?
Well, if we're done with the discussion, then you need a motion.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys feel that you've had sufficient discussion and input from the public, if you have an idea of what direction you're leaning, if someone is comfortable making a motion.
I would entertain a motion.
I would make a motion.
Oh, I knew you
Okay.
would.
I would make a motion that we accept. Now, one thing that we did not talk about are the stairs. And to me, that really doesn't comply, but it's such a nit. And it doesn't bother the neighbors, that I would make a motion to accept the proposed design as presented.
Second.
And we do a roll call vote?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do a roll call. Janie Jenkins,
Yes.
John Leo,
Yes.
Sue Stewart,
Yes.
Kathy Macho,
Yes.
Kim Morris.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, apologies for the delay.
Understandable.
Any other business? Brenda? Do we have any other business to say?
No, we did not, we did not receive any applications for next month. So we will not need to have an April meeting.
We get a break.
We get a break.
Okay.
And, we do not need a motion to a meeting. Like
Which the end of the.
I, too, it has to just.